I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks.
And that little girl was me.
Can I buy a vinyl?
You know, can I buy a?
And so when we're talking about facing challenges of people at high risk and targeted groups and minority population, it's trauma. So you got to think about what this person brings to the table. We're not always going to get it right. One thing that we in society don't want to appreciate anymore is apologizing. I apologize, I'm sorry. And so those words, I'm sorry, are so powerful. And so individuals don't expect everybody to get it right. But when you apologize and you're really listening to try to be better, then you do better. And
so well-versed and so phenomenal, whether you work on a register or you're in the C-suite, you have a skill set that's so needed that someone is willing to rent your time. They are leasing your time. Figure out your promise first, not your product. What is your promise?
Safely, when it's all said and done, the police is going to protect the state. And that is why the slaughter of Black bodies and Black people at the hands of the police is such an epidemic, because they are trained and they commit to a training of policing.
So my book is about my struggle, but how I overcame it. And to let Black women know, and just women of all colors. And I'm not going to just say that it's just for Black women, but Black women, we need this. It's okay to say, I'm not okay. It's okay to go get help. If you can't have a child, that means your vagina is no better or no worse than the next person. Okay? And
Well, hello, Dr. Johnson. How are you?
I'm well. How are you, Mr. King?
I am great. I'm glad that yet another week has come to an end.
Yes, honey. Listen, it's so much going on in the world right now. I just think that we need to go ahead and wrap up 2020 on December 31st. I think that everybody needs to yell Jumanji. And so we can get on to the next phase of life. That's what I think needs to happen right now.
And be done.
And be done.
And just be done. Just be done. Because 2020 I felt like 2020 was going to leave its mark, but it didn't quite leave the mark I was thinking.
Oh, it left the mark. It left the bruise. It left a black eye. It left a couple of cuts and some abrasions. It left all
my God.
Yes, it did. But we do have, the president-elect, the vice president-elect. Families are, closer together. I think we've been able to reevaluate some things. So 2020 was the year. Honestly, it was a year of vision. Like you had to come out saying very differently. Yeah. After the last 365 days.
Yeah, it did more than just. It was a year of reckoning for more than just our country as a whole, but for us individually. Because I think I said to you before, but I've said it a million times that it told us that you're going to either be a hustler or you're going to be a victim. But those are the only two options. Either you're going to learn how to swing up against that wall or you're going to get beat into that wall.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I learned that. I did. I've lost some things in 2020. I've gained some things in 2020. I was able to really change my perspective on a lot of things. And I was able to find peace.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But look at some of the beauties. And I'm glad you said that because that is so true. And that's why I've been talking for the last 2 weeks on panels about the mere fact that we have to still always take moments to appreciate and celebrate the good that came out during these times. Because if we only focus on the bad, then we're just going to be angry and pissed off for the rest of our lives. But when we get to a place where we can actually say, you know what, some good did come out of this.
Yeah,
we did grow closer. You know, we
absolutely.
did. And you finished your PhD.
I did. Finally after fighting for so long.
Yes.
But I got back to me and I learned, I'm not going to shrink. Either if you're going to be around me, I'm not going to shrink myself. Either you're going to stretch, you can get around. You know what I mean? Like you have I learned that, to really prioritize things. I learned that, the dangers of stress and what it really does to the body. And I just said, I'm not going to be stressed out. What's going to be is what's going to be. However it's going to come is whenever it's going to come. And I'm just going to be patient. Like, because if I kill over, who's going to be here for my babies?
My goodness.
Yeah. So there was a lot. That was a lot of readjusting.
Yeah. That's real talk. Yeah. That's real talk. I was telling someone earlier today, we were on the phone just chatting it up about the good and the bad, the happy and the sad. And I told them that my new philosophy coming out of this pandemic is my existence will not be interrupted. Period.
Love that.
That's where I am. That's where I'm at, but that's just where I'm at. My existence will not be interrupted. You will not tell me I have to melt down or become invisible just so that you can somehow exist. If we can't coexist, I won't be the one to disappear. You will disappear. I will not disappear. But with that being said, we do have a very special guest. Venita Ray, which is a whole cup of awesomeness. She came highly recommended. So I would love for her to come in so we could just go on and get with it. And I have a feeling that you and her going to be soul sisters when this is over because she reminds me so much of you.
I get excited. Venita, how are you this Thursday?
I'm doing well. Thank you. I appreciate y'all having me here.
Yes, ma'am. I see all these books
in here.
Pardon?
I said I see all of these wonderful books in the background. I'm wondering if I can borrow maybe 3 or 4.
Books are free here, so yes, I will give away a book. I've never had one stolen. I am a fanatic a little bit, but I got to have a real book in my hand sometimes.
Yes,
ma'am. Yeah. We're readers. We are readers.
Most definitely.
I still own encyclopedias.
Oh my God. Okay, you got me beat then. And I probably have more up here than I really read because my time. But when I hear of a new one, I still order it and it's back here for when I get time.
Absolutely.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Well, Venita, once again, thank you so much for being here. But can you just start off by telling our viewers more about you and your work?
Well, sure. So I'm Venita Ray. I happen to be the Deputy Director of the Positive Women's Network, USA. It is a national membership organization for women and trans folks living with HIV. We are a social justice organization. We utilize a human rights framework and gender and racial justice framework in doing the work. It's interesting because I came to this work because I was diagnosed with HIV in 2003 and had a really tough time dealing with it. because, I'm one of those people that came from a community that, I had a daughter very young at 15 and went through all of the other trials and tribulations it takes to find my way. And thought I had finally arrived at 18 years sober. I had dropped out of high school when I got pregnant with my daughter. So I went back to school at night and went on to law school, living my dream job, dream life in my dream house in Washington, D.C. And then April 2nd, 2003, I get the call after a physical and my world went black.
Wow.
I was one of those people really angry with God because I thought, wait, I done went through all this to get here now, and I done finally arrived. The child is grown. I done did all this, and it took me about 4 years of darkness. That call came. I could still see the day. I worked for the Office of the Attorney General in the District of Columbia. I closed my office, walked out that door, walked home, and they didn't see me for a month. And I ended up moving here to Houston, where I am now, in this darkness, really not wanting to go on because I thought I had just been through enough. And 4 years later, I get this voice in my head being here because, it's hard to plan for tomorrow when you don't really want to be here. If you're suicidal, you can't plan. And so 4 years later of kind of existing, I got a voice in my head said, either kill yourself or find a way to move on, and I eventually did that, and it led me into maybe not back to the practice of law, but it led me back into, doing work around HIV advocacy and being able to use my skills and my passion to really, do work in communities. I'd always worked in communities and working on social justice issues, but now, HIV became another one, and it just gave me another way to see if I could build leaders, how I could uplift voices, how we can change policies. And that was like 2012, and it's been off to the races since then. And I've just done a lot of work here in Houston with other women living with HIV, and eventually started a chapter of the Positive Women's Network here in Texas in 2014 and 2015, started a program to develop leadership of other people living with HIV, and then eventually got on the board of directors of this organization, and now I'm the deputy director of the organization and still doing the work, and now focusing a lot on intersectionality, racial justice issues. We're really trying to get to the heart of what the HIV epidemic is about. It isn't about people living with HIV. The HIV is the symptom of these other systemic and structural issues that we really have to deal with. And so that has become more of the focus of my work. But the road here it still was an interesting one. I'll say that.
Tell us about, intersectionality and what role, one, what is intersectionality for people that don't know? And then two, how does that play a role or impact people that are, women or of color or trans or any of those differing social identities? How does that impact them?
So, we use intersectionality a lot, but it was developed by a sister, Kimberly Crenshaw, and she developed this concept when she was studying domestic violence issues around Black women and trying to really identify all the different factors. And she saw that it wasn't as simple as, leave, do all this. And she came up with this concept of intersectionality to just try to demonstrate that you have to look at a multiple kinds of issues and identities and oppressions to really be able to look at what folks are going through and what's needed. Audre Lorde talks about we don't lead single issue lives, so there's no single issue solutions, right? Mm-hmm. So intersectionality in my work is really about, you cannot just give someone a pill and expect the epidemic to go away. You have to deal with issues of intersectionality about multiple identities and multiple oppressions. Folks want to talk a lot about stigma and all of this. And I say stigma isn't an apple, it's an onion, it's multi-layered. You got the stigma of living with HIV, you might have the racism, transphobia, homophobia, poverty, discrimination. And for myself, Black woman from the hood, teenage mother, drug addict, all of those identities have shaped who I was and the experiences I had and the opportunities that were presented with me. To deal with one without the other, you weren't going to really address my whole needs, and really, how do we create opportunities for people to really succeed? Is like, I can give you medicine, but you ain't got no food. I can treat your HIV, but you got mental health issues. And we wonder why people fail. So, I deal a lot with intersectionality in the standpoint of, we know poverty is the greatest predictor of HIV. We're looking at criminal justice. We're looking at social determinants of health. We're looking at access to. You can't look at people without considering all of the things that they bring to bear, and how we address and come up with solutions and support people in achieving more.
I mean, so, so I don't, my dissertation, now I can actually talk about it. So my dissertation focused on the police, right? And how their policy and their practices impacted how they identified transgender people after they had been murdered. And even in looking at that, there's a multiplicity of issues. One is policy. One is how the police use discretionary force or discretionary power when enforcing policy. And then how they are imagining people when they're interacting with them, right? And so I think when you're talking about AIDS and HIV, there's this imagination, there's this perception, there's this thing that we believe to be that, that somebody with HIV looks like, or is or has done or experienced or lived. And so can you talk about that and how that actually impacts people in a variety of ways?
Yeah, that is so huge. Here we are 40 something years after we first discovered what would be called HIV, and we're still dealing with huge amounts of stigma and misperceptions about who we are, about how you get it and who gets it and stuff. And it is so huge. People say that, we have a medicine for HIV, but no medicine for stigma, right? We have no medicine for, giving people opportunity and not judging them. You can meet somebody, they want to know how I got it. How I got it ain't the issue, because they have these foregone conclusions in their head. And to be real, a lot of us living with HIV take on that stigma, and we internalize it. And because that's what my 4-year darkness journey was about, is even though they'll tell you, well, Venita, it's not a death sentence. And we know that, but there's a mental, emotional, and social impact to living with HIV. You experience it, especially being a Black woman in our community, you experience it from the church, who still doesn't want to deal with it. Now, I tell them, when you deny me, you deny that baby who was born living with HIV. And this gentleman over here might have got it from a transfusion. Right. So how we got it ain't the issue. And I'm not quite clear what that's about, but stigma still is one of the main impediments to people seeking care, and to really why the epidemic is still what it is. The stigma rages there, in addition to the systemic stuff, because, folks don't want to take their medicine, don't want to go to the doctor, don't want to, even you don't want to be found to have HIV because of your idea. When I get asked to go speak in a church, and I'm not a big church girl, so let's just be clear, but I always tell them, I guarantee y'all showing me a lot of love today, but if y'all showed that same love every day, no church would need an outsider coming to speak about HIV. Because those people that you sit next to every day hear the innuendos and the little comments, and they're not going to be visible. One of the reasons I live out loud is because I can now, but I do it because I'm showing people, I'm a grandmother, I'm a lawyer, I'm an auntie, I'm all these things, and we have to humanize it, but everybody can't do that because the shame is great. People have lost jobs, husbands, homes, all kinds of things. And it is really a shame. And they'll say, well, Venita, HIV is like diabetes. And I said, well, tell me somebody who lost their job from diabetes.
Wow.
So yeah, it is a big deal. And it really is a shame. There is hundreds of secret Facebook groups of people still reaching out for social support, but don't want to be public. It's just really a shame, but you're exactly right.
Can you talk about that though? Can you marry those things, stigma and intersectionality, and how it shows up differently?
Oh my God, it does. One of the things we spoke about earlier today, one of the people, so in communities and doing this work and work in advocacy, I work with a lot of Black gay men, or, I work with trans community and stuff. With the group that I don't work a lot with is Black heterosexual men. because of all of those multiple things. For black men to come open with their status, they first got to defend their sexuality or feel like they have to because of the perception of who gets HIV and how you had to get it. And so from that to their questions of manhood, from, and maybe don't have a job or getting a job, so you have all of these issues that come to bear of the image they have to have in the Black community, with the home, with the family, and then their own sense of who they are and having their sexuality challenged. It is really, so you find them undercover, and I say undercover, not DL, so let's be clear.
Right.
Because just not being open about their status and still trying to take care of homes and families with whatever other issues they may have to deal with. We see it, most of our membership, we have a national membership across the country, but probably 75% of our membership, our women, live at the poverty line. They're primarily in the South. Black women make up 60% of all women living with HIV in this country. Why is that?
Why?
Is it because the intersection of race and gender? We dealing with racism and gender equity and all of those issues that even our brothers don't deal with. And the gender pay gap, never mind language, because when I say Black women, I'm talking about the rainbow. So we could have immigration, language, you could be dealing with, issues of trying to get a job, low wages, and still being a woman in a society with patriarchy and all of that. So all of that Black women have to feel. When I ask people sometimes in a meeting before I talk, I say, so why are Black women most impacted? Because I got tired of hearing the data and nobody peeking behind the curtain, right? And the down low brother, we don't know how to take care of this stuff. And it just blows me away that nobody's looking at just the pure intersection of what race and gender means for women in this country, be Black women, and dealing with racism and gender issues and patriarchy. And so it just blows me away. Never mind mass incarceration and where we have to live and all of these things that not only impact the woman, but our mates, right? So intersectionality and stigma run deep, and those same communities that we live in also have negative perceptions of who we are if we're open about our HIV status.
So you brought up some really points. Oh, I'm sorry, Wendell. I got
no, go.
So you brought up some really good points about like the key population. So you talked about heterosexual Black men, which we rarely think about. Even myself, rarely think about when you talk about the AIDS population. You talked about Black homosexual gay men. You have touched on the trans community, and you talked about Black women. So can you talk more in depth about the key populations that are being impacted by HIV and AIDS?
So and key populations is terms that are used by CDC and World AIDS and all of this stuff, but they're basically trying to say, same gender loving men, which they call them men who have sex with men. I just don't use it a lot. I think it's a clinical term that we don't need to be using on people. So it could be gay or bisexual men, Black and brown primarily. It is Latinx, gay, bisexual men. And then the next group is Black women. But then other key populations, you never hear us called out as a key population from like the CDC and stuff. I'm gonna call it out. But you'll hear sex workers, you'll hear people who use drugs. Those typically are people that you hear called out as key populations. I'm gonna say not only are our Black and brown gay men, are primarily Black trans sisters, Black women. You don't hear Black heterosexual men called out as a key population. But I say to you, and me and my daughter have this argument all the time, is if Black women have it the most, where are we getting it? It's because Black heterosexual men not only are being miscounted, and not being represented, because when you go through the list of who's on top, it used to be white gay men. They're not there anymore. It is Black and brown gay men. And then the next group is Black women. The heterosexual men or brown men are much lower down, but the key populations typically they refer to as sex workers, people who use drugs, and the other groups that I just talked about. You don't always hear Black heterosexual women included in key populations or Black heterosexual men. But I know it is because we represent 13% of the population, but yet almost half of the people in the US living with HIV are Black. And that primarily is in the South. The South is considered the epicenter of the epidemic now. More Black folks here, and we deal with more of those systemic issues that I was talking about, of poverty, lack of access to health care, the criminal justice system, and all of those things that I told you are the real root causes of HIV.
And it could also be, do you think like maybe the South, because we're below the Bible Belt and we don't really have conversations about sexuality and sexual orientation and desire?
Absolutely, as well as policies. We have real conservative governments. When you look at where Medicaid wasn't expanded, it was primarily not expanded in the South. I live here in Texas. We have the highest uninsured rate in the country, but did they expand Medicaid? No. That's why we probably are one of the top 10 cases for new cases of HIV as well. So policies.
That's a good conversation.
Yeah.
That's a really good conversation. I find that very interesting because, when the whole HIV epidemic took off, it was mainly on the East Coast. And so that is, it is interesting on how did it somehow drop to the South and much larger, much larger.
Well, the places that it kind of originated with not only the East Coast, but the West Coast, so San Francisco and places like that, those places have really done a lot to get their epidemics under control, with governments that are more progressive, with policies more progressive and stuff. Whereas the South, we don't have the luxury of that. Those are places Medicaid was expanded. Those are places that there's greater access to healthcare. Those are places that do a lot of things that the South doesn't. And when you think about that, the epidemic is so disproportionately among Black folks, we have the largest Black population in the South.
Isn't it weird? Like, that's also weird. It's like, it's scary weird. It's
and think about this
we're like still in slavery.
Think about this too. When we talked about intersectionality, access to mental health services, access to reproductive health services, all of those things that are needed to really treat the whole person, to really, find ways for folks to stay healthy. You see it more prevalent on the coast, whether it's East or West. And we just have more work to do here in the South. I'll say that.
Well, while you're talking about the South, I would love for you to discuss even further, because you brought up some legislature and things of that nature. So what are some of the things that we're looking at or dealing with in Texas as far as accountability and transparency? What are we not seeing? And what are we not doing as far as lobbying?
Well, first I got to start off with just by folks, we focus a lot on the federal government and recognizing that state governments have huge impact on the daily lives of people. So we need an eye there, but we also need to look in our backyard, because those policies and laws really impact folks. Texas is a unique kind of creature, and folks don't really understand it because our legislature doesn't even meet every year. It meets every other year. It's still doing something that it put in its constitution years ago, when it took them a long time, a horse and buggy, to travel cross country, and they couldn't afford to be there often. So they said, we'll meet every other year for only 150 days. It's been in there for that long, and they still haven't changed it. So first of all, just access to the state legislature is difficult. So it only meets on the odd year. So we're getting ready to have a session in 2021 and only for 150 days. That's just incredible. So for you to find that out and figure a way to get involved is first problem.
Right.
And then once it does that, it's still pretty much Republican controlled, the governor and lieutenant governor. Texas has just had a history of not only, legislation around voter suppression, gerrymandering districts, they've just done all kind of oppressive stuff with the last session, they had a constitutional amendment that would have given the death penalty for an abortion. And it probably will come up again this time. So we're getting ready to go into the 87th Texas legislature, and legislators were allowed to start filing bills on November 7th, I believe. And right now I've seen about 35 bills related to voting already. Some of them are trying to restrict access to voting, because of what just happened. And there's some bills that are trying to expand it. I don't expect to see expansions. We're just going to really have to fight against the restrictions of whether it's the type of voting the type of ID you can use, about mail-in voting, if you can't imagine, and all kinds of things. I've seen bills. I've seen bills that are trying to make 2 ounces of marijuana or less, where you only get a ticket. So there are some good things, but there are really some things that we need to be concerned about. We're probably going to see the criminalization of COVID come up. There's already one bill that could do that. The criminalization of HIV, I've seen a bill around, and it's just.
What explain that?
What's that?
That bill about the criminalization of HIV.
So
and COVID.
Well, so the criminalization of HIV has been going on for too long. We have probably 32 or something states that have HIV specific statutes that criminalize people living with HIV for whether failure to disclose or putting people at risk. Even to consensual adults, somebody could be arrested for if someone claims you did not tell them. So we have that going on. We got people in prison in Texas for 20 years or more for spitting while positive. And I kid you not, they're sitting there right now. But Texas used to have an HIV specific law years ago, and they repealed it, but they're using general criminal laws to do the same thing. So if you spit on a police officer and you're living with HIV, instead of being assault, it's aggravated assault. If you have sex with someone who says, you sexually assaulted them, if you're living with HIV, it's aggravated sexual assault, and your enhancements go up. So even though we don't have an HIV specific law, every 2 years I'm on pins and needles because people have been trying to introduce new legislation. And one bill that's up right now that says if any of your bodily fluids or any of your bodily parts come in contact with someone with a communicable disease, and they're using the word communicable disease in our mind to expand to COVID, that you could be subject to aggravated assault and subject to, and then the statute of limitations is extended. So I've had calls with Lambda Legal and a few other folks, and they believe they're trying to widen it so that COVID and HIV can be used.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But criminalization of COVID, we've already been seeing through this pandemic already. That's not new. And you're seeing Blacks be ticketed more for not wearing a mask or wearing a mask or not, or moving the way they should. So we've already seen that happening. It's happening worldwide, but we've seen it in the US.
Wow.
I'm sorry, I was right. I was right. Everything that you said now. Because I think
the HIV is so weird. I'm sorry, Aurelia, but the HIV thing is so weird to me that it's still being weaponized. The same as it was in the early 80s when it first kind of hit hard. It's just they try and be more subtle with it. But it's just amazing that we're still there.
In Texas, our court has said that my bodily function, my bodily fluids, and my sexual organ is a deadly weapon. That's how serious it is in here in Texas. As a matter of fact, that statute that bill that I told you was filed, they used the term deadly weapon in that bill. So my bodily fluids and my sexual organs are considered a deadly weapon here in Texas. I fought against this. I've written blogs on it that I am not a deadly weapon, but that is what the courts here have said in Texas.
But that just sounds like the recycling, right, of old adages, right, of the Black male penis or the Black woman's vagina or her womb and uterus, right? It sounds like the very same thing. And then when you're talking about Black folks only being 13% of the population, but making up a good number of the majority of people that are in prison, and now you're using this legislation to then recycle and reinforce and to move people back into the prison industrial complex. I just think that's absolutely insane.
It's a policy issue. When do we take a health condition and make it criminal? You either, one of my books here is, pills versus prisons. What do you want to do? You cannot prosecute and prevent. You need to make a choice. And, I've been to the legislature arguing this before. But another thing about the Texas legislature is the challenge. So it will start on January 12th of 2021, and it is scheduled to end on May 31st. They can file bills all the way up to March 1st. So you have this little window to try to stop stuff. It moves so fast that it's just a challenge to, you stay on top of those. 50 days to really stay involved. And what I started getting involved with the legislature in like 2015 when the first criminalization bill they tried to do, and I lost my mind over. And now every year, and last year I started something called the Texas Strike Force. And that's where I'm training folks in the community and teaching them how to engage at the legislature. I'm training women living with HIV how to go online and put your alerts in there so you can monitor bills. And then we decide, do we need to let people know who can we get to testify? And we're getting ready to start that up again, where we're going to be doing monitoring the Texas legislature, and as well as planning for a virtual HIV lobby day probably in March. It's usually in person. I'm going to also plan for a virtual one next year. But to get folks engaged and get our voices up there, get our stories up there, get our faces up there, it is just really imperative that we get folks involved. And then never mind the redistricting that's getting ready to happen. You know, every 10 years after the census, and there's, you can Google it and there's a schedule that they should be following, but that stuff largely happens behind closed doors. You got to find it and find out how to be involved in it to see how they're going to do. And with the gutting of the Rights Act, you know, about pre-clearance, we still lawsuits going on about some gerrymandered districts here in Texas. And so we really need to be engaged in that process around redistricting, because remember, that's where you can it's been used to dilute the Black vote or the minority vote. And I suspect fear is high right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
you know, your what you're doing with your Texas Strike Force, I found that to be very very helpful and very impactful. And reminds, I had the luxury of working with the Thurgood Marshall at Texas University Center for Justice. I was one of the instructors where they brought in the first section. They brought in 50 former prisoners, and what our job was to teach them on how to lobby for rights for them. And they each had their own struggle. One woman wanted to release the box. That was her thing. Her goal was to get the box off where you have to say if you've been to, if you have a felon or not, right? So each one of them had a different fight. So our job was to teach them how to create their own 2-minute speeches, their elevator pitches, you know, on how to go up and do that. And that's what I get from your Texas Strike Force. And I think that's something that we all should learn how to do with you, or how can we all get involved in that work that you're doing so that we can all better strengthen ourselves, and at the same time bring in our communities, our individual communities, because they don't have a voice. I mean, no, they have a voice, but they haven't been taught on how to use it properly. So what can we do?
Oh my God, there's a lot you can do. People not only have they have a voice, don't believe that it matters, you know, and so how do you give people confidence to do that? But my organization, Positive Women's Network, we are doing a number of webinars, a series of them around participating in the legislative process. So the first one was November 18th, and I need to go back and get the dates of the rest, but it's on our website, Positive Women's Network USA. But we, you know, the first one was an intro to just general legislative work. The next one will be about Policy 101. Then there will be a webinar on messaging and then mobilization. So that's kind of a general legislative series, because remember, our members are all over the country. Part of the Strike Force, we're going to have our first Texas-based training on December 9th. And it's coming up. I need to look at the time. I can send you something on that. And we're going to have one in December and one in January for the Texas Strike Force. And again, teaching people, legislature, what are the committees, and how do I engage? And then for a few folks I have that I will be teaching, we will go into the next step of monitoring, because when we work in communities, we want to teach them how to do it, not do it for them, you know, and folks are learning, you know, how to monitor bills, how to write summaries, and then how do we get that out to people for broader mobilization. So I would love to have you or share our information about the trainings coming up, and then participating with the Texas Strike Force trainings and our advocacy day that we'll have in 2021.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. We need y'all, because you know, there's a lot of work to do here in Texas.
Yes, ma'am.
So much.
And you led into something when you're talking about the Texas Strike Force and getting the information into the people in the community. So thinking about that, do you believe that the population that's heavily impacted by HIV and stigma surrounding HIV, do you think that they'll ever have access to real justice?
I have to believe it, but I don't think we're going to have it without a fight. My favorite saying is power concedes nothing without a demand. And it never has. What is it?
And it never will.
You know, and to be honest, it's what gets me up in the morning, because we cannot stop. You know, I have been thinking of these racial justice issues for years. I was raised in Oakland during the 70s and the Black Panther movement. I was too young for it, but I started reading. Right. And you know, it really hurts my heart. It broke my heart even after this election. I have a 16-year-old grandson who's driving. I had to have the talk 2.0 with him again. So yeah, I believe we're gonna have justice, but we gotta fight. You know, we have got to fight. We have got to get strategic. And there are folks that are trying to do that, you know, around racial justice and some of these issues. But as you see the desperation of what we are dealing with around the loss of power, you know, that the police state, the craziness that we see on TV. So it is not going to happen without a fight, and I have to believe it. And we've got to equip people. We got to unplug more people from the matrix and really make them aware of what white supremacy is and how deep it is and what anti-Blackness is about. And we really got to let people find their lanes to do it, because it's not just one lane. That's why I'm intersectional. We have criminal justice advocates, we got racial justice advocates, we got human rights advocates. All those lanes lead somewhere, and they've got to lead to liberation. And when I ask folks, what does Black liberation look like? I typically get crickets, because that requires a level of imagination a lot of folks ain't had the privilege to have. And we've got to begin to talk about what that can look like, because you got to have something to dream for. You know, folks looked at the North Star. What's our North Star?
What's the North Star?
Yeah. So, you know, it's funny you said that, because I always, my new kick on debating with people about anti-Blackness or anti-whiteness or pro-Blackness and pro-whiteness, I always start off by saying, what is our end goal? If our end goal matches, we're good. Now we can argue and debate about the way to get to the end goal, but before I can go forward in a conversation, I have to know that we have the same end goal. I just have to know that, or either I don't want to talk to you. If you're not fighting for justice, if you're not fighting for equality, I don't care to debate with you on why we should not have justice, why we should not have equality. I don't care to have a conversation with you. And so that unplugging people from the matrix is hard, but it's work that is needed, because so many people have become, it's so convoluted. So many people are just ignorant, just completely ignorant to it.
But think of this: you were raised on the Matrix. That's why I love science fiction, because it gives you a chance to imagine if that's all you were fed, right? You know, and there's people I've worked with over the years who are now becoming woke. And one of them came to me today one day and said, "Venita, this is hard work, though. Now, once you begin to see," and I said, "Well, would you prefer the other way?" She said, "No." But damn, because she sees so much. So when you're only raised, you know, that way, I have women telling me, and I used to say this too, you know, I got HIV because I was looking for love in all the wrong places. Well, wasn't that person over there looking for it too in all the wrong places, but they don't have HIV. And one of my biggest arguments is I take the same 17-year-old kid. This kid is in an affluent neighborhood, this one in a Black neighborhood. They do the same behavior. They experimenting. But when this one gets HIV, I look at him and go, damn, you should have known better. Well, he did the same thing, but the vulnerability is different, because his community has lack of access to healthcare. He has a higher viral load in this community. So these people over here are looking for love in all the wrong places too. But the places that were looked in, folks had more.
Right.
So, you know.
What this boils down to is the fight.
But we can't quit. Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking, you know, because you're talking about unplugging from the matrix, and I'm just thinking, you know, and then social justice, and I'm thinking about racism and all the other isms and phobias we have in America. But can we actually have some type of liberation and still be in a capitalistic society? Like, can those things exist? Or do we have to find a balance? Because we still have to survive.
That's right. When I finished law school, I wanted to go out there and conquer the world because I'd already been doing this work some. And I was like, but we need to do it. And somebody told me, they said, Venita, revolutionaries got to pay rent. And so, yes, but it's what I value. You know, I live a little simpler because I do the work that feeds me. You know, I do the work. So I'm not advocating for an overthrow of capitalism. I am advocating for, you know, you can tell where a community values and where they spend their time and their money. I want to see a little more time and money spent around folks. I want to hear something that talks about real stuff and not, you know, shaming and blaming in the language that you use to refer to Black people. And really, you know, you oppress people, then blame them for their oppression. You know, so I believe they can coexist. I just believe that we've got to be aware, you know, of what it means. I got to be aware when I'm playing the game, you know, playing the game. Ignorance isn't bliss. It is not, you know, because I'm just a puppet in the process. I'd rather at least have a level of self-determination about what I do. Somebody told me, when you go to law school, you're going to sell out and all that stuff. No, I've always been clear. It just gave me the choice to do the work I wanted versus just surviving doing what I had to. That's all.
Well, Venita, you have been exceptional.
Oh, yeah.
I have thoroughly enjoyed hearing every word that you used, and I love your word placement. It gave me chills at several different areas. So thank you for sharing the work with us to inspire the work in us, because you stirred up something. So thank you.
I appreciate y'all, because y'all
your work is not in vain, and I think that is the beauty of the work.
No, I appreciate y'all. I really do. I dread doing this stuff, but I'm always doing it if I have to. So thank you all for having me.
Absolutely. So is there a Facebook or Twitter or social media?
Well, you are awesome at doing it.
Well, for Positive Women's Network, we're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. My Twitter handle is Lady V1. So folks can always find me. Twitter, if you look up Positive Women's Network, you're gonna always see me. Okay. And I had a reporter interview me once, and I didn't tell them this, and they said it, but I loved it. They said, and I call him Dump Trump. Dump Trump is building walls, and Venita is building an army. Let's build an army.
Yes.
Come on. Come on, Venita's Army. Well, we like to end with a quote in the name of Dr. Candace Matthews, that is not here with us right now, but she's here with us, but not here with us all the way. But in the spirit of Dr. Matthews, we do like to end with a quote. So the quote that I grabbed for tonight that I thought was so fitting is: the struggle against patriarchy and racism must be substantively robust and inextricably intertwined. And that is Kimberly Williams Crenshaw. And I think that matches this conversation to the T.
Oh, powerful. Perfect. Thank you all.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And you have a great night. Guys, you all have a great weekend. I hope that you have a great weekend also, Aurelia Johnson.
Listen, after this conversation, honey, I'm ready to get to work.
Yes. Well, remember, y'all can catch us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We are Truth to Power Uncut. Like, share, and if you have a chance, go on our YouTube channel and click subscribe. It only takes a second, and it doesn't cost a penny. So it's nothing hurting you, but everything is helping us.
I got you.
Thank you again. Thank you, Venita. You have a wonderful weekend.
All right, y'all take care too.
Bye, Dr. Johnson.
Bye, my love.
I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks.
And that little girl was me.